I remember watching a fantastic film called A History of Violence, which is a David Cronenberg movie, which has a kind of a similar plot to the first film, but is unimaginably dark, whereas our film was not. And I really sort of liked the idea of making on one level, a homage to a thing, but without belittle. I think History of Violence is a fantastic film, but obviously we didn't want that for this because it would have been a repetition and it would have been miserable. Because the first film was about, you could say it's a comedy about a father trying to kill his own son, which obviously is not very funny, is it? But it
when
was.
you put it like that, it's quite funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey everyone, I'm Billy and welcome back to Half the Picture. I'm so pleased to say that our guest this episode is director Simon Cellan Jones, whose new film with Mark Wahlberg, The Family Plan 2, is out in cinemas today. I had so much fun chatting to Simon on this episode of the podcast and diving deep into his process shooting Family Plan 2 with Mark Wahlberg, the sort of improvisational nature and quality of that shoot, working with actors like Mark and obviously Michelle Monaghan and the rest of the great cast. And we also found time to dive into some of Simon's other work, his television work like Generation Kill with David Simon, who wrote The Wire, of course, and also stuff like Years and Years with Russell T Davies. So it was a lot of fun sort of diving deep into all those different areas with Simon on this episode. So, without further ado, let's roll on my conversation with Simon Cellan Jones. Enjoy. Hello, welcome to the show, Simon. How are you doing?
Hello there, thrilled to be here, doing great.
Excellent. So we've got you on today to talk about your new film with Mark Wahlberg, The Family Plan 2, which is due out in a few weeks. And it's interesting watching that film and also sort of going back and looking at your career as a filmmaker and a television director, because you've had an incredibly distinguished career over the course of it. You've directed some amazing stuff, on big and small screens, stuff like Years and Years and Generation Kill and Jessica Jones, and now you and Mark Wahlberg have kind of partnered up and you've done a few films together. And I guess as a kickoff, as a fan of Wahlberg, I wanted to ask, how did you guys sort of partner up to work on the Family Plan films? Was he a fan of yours? Did he reach out because he was a fan to get you on board?
Well, I knew him a little bit because I've worked a lot with his producer before, and Mark indeed was a executive producer on a few things I did. And then I think it was one of those lucky things, I think, where he was doing a film called Arthur the King that was absolutely good to go, and because of COVID, dates shifted, they lost their director, they needed someone at short notice. And I went, boom, I'm available. And, I'm not saying they were desperate, but they needed someone to start soon. And it worked out great. And, I was nervous because it was a bigger film than I'm used to. I've worked with lots of big actors, but, Mark is pretty up there as a movie star. And it turns out he is utterly delightful to work with. He's funny, he's supportive, he's inclusive, he's talented, he's professional. And although he's my boss, basically, because he's a producer as well, that's not how he rolls. And we got on great. We had a lot of fun. We like to work in a similar way. And then he said, oh, how about this next one? And then, then the next one. So it's a lovely, lovely thing for me.
Fantastic. That's great to hear because, as I say, I'm a fan of his. Going back obviously to the early days on stuff like Boogie Nights and all the way up through Departed, all those great films. Because that was my next question actually that you touched on there was I was going to ask what was he like to work with not only as a star, as an actor, but also as a producer on the film? Because did he have quite a hands-on sort of approach to the films that you guys have made that he's produced?
He's very gentle and he doesn't push his way in, but he's one of those guys that doesn't really need to do much because the film just gets made. So, he's one of the few people who can pick up the phone and speak to pretty well anyone in the world. So, it's like you've got this amazing support system. He's not shouting at people. He's not sort of giving orders, but he knows what he wants. He knows the sort of film he wants to make, and we talk about that. And he's a sort of both a secret weapon and a very clear and open weapon in any film you make.
Interesting. Oh, that's great to hear. With The Family Plan 2 then, because, so I've watched the film. It was a privilege to see it before it goes out, on the 21st of November. Having seen the first one as well, they're a really nice mix. One of my favourite things about them is that they're such a nice mix of both action and comedy with this kind of family-friendly tone. And when I was watching back the movies, you have that core unit of, the family. I mean, I guess the basic premise being that, Mark Wahlberg is this kind of ex-government assassin who then he's in deep cover, and he has been for years, and he has a whole family with Michelle Monaghan, and then his cover gets rumbled, and then they have to go on the run, but as a family unit. And so you have this real mix of hijinks with the family, but also with the action, with the assassins that are kind of pursuing them. And with that core family unit of like Mark and Michelle and then the children, like there's such a great palpable sense of chemistry between all of them. Like it feels very lived in and real. And I just wanted to ask, like, what was the casting process like for those four? Obviously Mark was, from the beginning, but like getting the rest of them in, and also just like making that sort of those relationships feel lived in and alive on screen as a director.
Well, we got really lucky with Michelle because, she was a class act, and has been for a while, but she just slotted in so well because she doesn't come in and play the little second lead wife, She's not that sort of person. She's in there. She's like, it came across that Mark and Michelle were kind of equals and as parents, ideally, you will be equals, and indeed, she's often even maybe a better parent than he is in the story. But so that gave us a real lift because they got such fun and simple chemistry with each other, and they loved working with each other. They had a real laugh. And we got lucky with the kids. We met lots of people. This is a couple of years ago now. And, in Zoe and Van, we just found those people who, I've got kids about that age, and I adore them, and they're brilliant, and they drive me mad sometimes. And of course, I do the same to them. I think that's one of the fun things about this film. And, we've seen several films where people used to be an assassin and then suddenly they get woken up. But what I like about these films is they've got a really normal family at the core of them, even though there's an interesting story to them. They just, they argue about homework and gaming and, phone use and all these things. And it's basically not a nuclear family, but it's a sort of straightforward, recognizable, identifiable family.
On that front then, because as you say, the films are kind of at their core, they're so explicitly about not only the family unit in terms of like the plot of the movies, but like the themes it's all about the importance of family and the relationships between family members. And I guess for you as the director, do these movies then making them with Mark and Michelle and the rest of the gang, like do they resonate with you personally? Obviously, as you say, as a family man yourself.
Very, very much so. Yeah. It's interesting. This film here is that because the characters are all a little bit older, the kids, instead of sort of having first boyfriend and girlfriend or doing too much gaming, the kids are starting to think about going to college and leaving the family home. And I think that's not every parent's nightmare, but it's a journey for every parent. And in our film, we see Dan, played by Mark, really desperate to keep the family together as long as he can, and the idea of them spending a Christmas apart is awful for him. So, plus, there's a sort of crazy person out there coordinating loads of gangsters to try and kill them all.
Yeah, I know. So they've got a lot on their plate. That was actually going to be my next question, because Kit Harrington plays the baddie in this one. It's got Kieran Hines play the baddie in the first one. I mean, at what point did you guys know that you wanted Kit, who obviously is such a distinctive screen presence? At what point did you know you wanted him for the movie?
Well, we always wanted him, and then there was a little bit, we weren't sure whether he was going to be available, and because then when we locked our dates, and I think we just got lucky. We met a few people, but Kit was always the guy, to be honest with you. And we got lucky. His dates worked. He was excited to do the script, and he loves Mark. I think it was really fun for him to do. I mean, he might say, "Oh my God, it was a nightmare," but actually, I think he had a really good time. And we would definitely work with him again.
And what were those two like together? Because obviously Mark and Kit have so many sort of scenes where they're really sort of, they're grill to grill, they're fighting, jaw to jaw, and it's quite intense. I mean, was it a fun shoot with them?
I'm sorry to say it was such fun. Yeah. I mean, obviously it was hard work, and we're serious about our work, and we don't want to mess about. Mark sets a great tone as an actor because he always shows up on time. He knows all his lines. He's got a plan for what he wants to do, and he treats everyone really well. So we're all going, "Oh, okay, he's going to be good. So we better raise our game here." And I think that's one of the things I love about him is that he empowers people to do good work. He doesn't sort of shout at people and tell them how to be good. He just gives them the space, and I think it's very empowering.
And I guess it kind of levels the playing field for everyone. Everyone can kind of feel comfortable to do their best work if, like, the mood comes from the top down. Is the feeling that I'm getting?
Very much
what
so.
You're saying.
Very much so. Yeah, it does. And he is the top, but he really sets the tone.
Fantastic. And on the subject of the shoot, because it's interesting that we're talking about the film. There's a whole sequence in the film that's set in Brick Lane, because there's a part of the movie. There's a globetrotting element to the movie, which I don't think is a secret to anyone who's seen the trailer. No. That Mark and the family, they come to visit their daughter in London, and she's staying in Brick Lane. And actually, our offices are based in Brick Lane. Like that whole sequence is right on our doorstep. So watching it, I was like, it's like, I'm going to be in there tomorrow morning. Working.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a famous old street. I mean, many, many years ago, I used to turn up at 4 a.m. to the same bagel shops that are still there, after a big night out. I think that's still a bit of a tradition. I think it's scaled up a little bit, but it's still pretty cool, I think, Brick Lane, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And those bagel shops are still going strong. I mean, what was your favorite? Did you go for the salt beef and gherkin?
Yeah,
Is that?
I'm afraid I did. Yeah, I'm afraid I did.
It's a classic. They do amazing cannolis as well in those bagel shops. I mean, it's actually a temptation not to go every lunch break to go and get a bagel. It's a great sort of vibrant area, and I think you captured some of that on the screen. When they first arrive, and there's I think it's a crane shot of them coming through the hubbub of it. Yeah, it's great.
And there's lots of lovely graffiti there, some of which we were able to feature. Obviously, we want everything to look great, but we didn't want, Nina, who's like a sort of middle-class person, not that rich. We didn't want her to be living in Sloane Square or, didn't want it to be unrealistic. So I think that's sort of where she would have lived.
Yeah, I appreciate that in the film. You get a nice mix of sort of, the hotel that they're staying in is just, it's near St. James's Park, but then you get a bit of the East End, you get a bit of, the West End, you kind of eat Central, you get a nice mix of you get a sense of the cosmopolitan sort of vibe of the city, which is nice to see. In terms of that globetrotting element then that we talk about, so, as we say, the second film sort of spans from, America to London to Paris. There's a whole stretch of film in Paris. And the first film, obviously, takes place, there's a globetrotting element, road movie element to that too, where they travel to Las Vegas for the third act. Thinking about the sort of globetrotting element of the film, I was curious to ask, whose idea does that originate with? I mean, because I'm thinking, is Mark, being the producer that he is, did he sort of sit down and go, it'd be fun to do this one if we sort of give it an international flavour and we can go and visit all these different locations? Or was that Dave Cogswell in the writer's room doing that? Or was that yourself?
I think it's all of us, really. I mean, we obviously, Mark, we very much keep in touch with him. I think we were all keen to film in London because it's such a classic city. As you say, the first film was a sort of a road movie, but ending up starting in Buffalo, which is a sort of beautiful but kind of distant part of New York, and then ending up in Las Vegas, which is one of the maddest cities in the world. Fun, but mad. So yeah, London, Paris had a sort of real classic thing, and I think Americans love the way those cities look. I used to be a location manager years ago, so I claimed to know London pretty well. And it was we wanted to keep the traveling thing going as well.
And then in terms of the rest of the cast, you've got people like Sanjeev Bhaskar in there, who's amazing, is always great. I mean, did you when you were reading that script, were you thinking, that could be a great part for Sanjeev to get in there?
Definitely. I mean, well, as you know, he's a legend, that boy, and he's fantastic. He's lovely to work with. But I think that's the nice thing about this films like this. You can get good actors, and there's a sort of they're there for a few days and they have a good time and they're in interesting scenes. So I think they're up for it. That really makes things fun.
That's excellent. So you didn't have to sort of push too hard. They were kind of like, oh no, I'm in. I want to do it. Let's go.
Yeah, no, we had to obviously. Yeah, you have to campaign to get them, but yeah, I think they were definitely open to the idea.
So going back to Mark and Michelle and the great chemistry they have, I mean, the opening of the film, I won't spoil it, but it's a terrific opening with them two. They share a very sort of funny, romantic, sort of tete-a-tete scene. It's palpable, the chemistry that they have. And I feel like Michelle Monaghan and Mark as well, but I think I've always been a fan of hers. And I feel like she's someone who's just so charismatic on screen that she could kind of have great chemistry with basically anyone. That's the vibe that I kind of get. And
I think that's probably true. I mean, she's so easy to hang out with. And she's been a big actor for a while now, but she's really having a moment now. I mean, with The Family Plan, also in White Lotus, she was fantastic. I don't know if you saw that.
Of course.
But she's, yeah, I mean, she's lovely with the crew, and I think what she does, again, she's very professional, but she loves what she does. I think she has just enough confidence to be able to enjoy it, but where it doesn't become sort of arrogance or whatever. She's just at that lovely level of being excited about what she's doing. And, you know, as you say, she's gorgeous and funny and cool. So, you know, I think anybody would have good chemistry with her, yes.
And she has such a great sense of humour as well. I mean, and that really comes through. That were there a lot of laughs on set? Because obviously the tone of the film is comedic. I mean, I understand that, like, when you're doing comedy, it can be such a technical thing that it can actually be a lot of very difficult and hard to get right. And sometimes it feels like comedies are great fun to watch, but are very tough to make. And did it feel a bit like that on set? Was it kind of were some of those sort of scenes quite tough to get right, even though they seem very effortless?
Well, they were tough to get right sometimes. But what was nice about the actors is, again, you know, starting from Mark, but very much backed up by Michelle. They quite like a little bit of improvisation. They like to keep it a bit fresh. So it's not like, you know, crazy making it up as you go along, but it's like reacting to a situation. So I thought, you know, we knew what the script was, and they sort of started out maybe sticking to the script, and then they go off the script. And so I think as a crew, we were surprised. And so, yes, we were laughing during the takes. You know, I had to, you know, sort of almost walk away because the sound man was shouting at me.
I mean, because that reminds me of when Paul Thomas Anderson, who's obviously worked with Mark on Boogie Nights, was making Phantom Thread with Daniel Day-Lewis, and he couldn't stop laughing at some of the stuff that Daniel Day-Lewis was doing. So Daniel Day-Lewis said, like, right, out, you know, like, we need to shoot the scene. And PTA was like, okay, fine. And he got up and left because he just couldn't stop laughing. I mean, did it ever get to that point where you were just like, all right,
I absolutely had to, but of course, you know, the actors are kind of glad that they're getting the right reaction, but it's very distracting for them. So, you know, I had to apologize several times.
And is that improvisational sort of quality that Mark and Michelle are bringing to the shoot? Does that extend to the other actors, like the two kids? Because being in the same room as, like, you're acting opposite Mark Wahlberg and Michelle Monaghan, who are both great, as well as Kit and you know, Sanjeev as well. I guess it must be maybe a bit intimidating for younger actors. Were they okay with that?
Well, they were, because we've already done a film before together. I think this time they were more confident, and they gave a good account of themselves. They were, you know, those Van and Zoe were, and even the two twins occasionally would throw in some zingers.
So Van and Zoe, they really had, one of the things I love the most about the movies is like I say, it's that lived in family dynamic, and it does feel lived in, it does feel authentic, and it does feel something that can only arise from people obviously who are really good but also really enjoy working together. And so, you know, it really crackles. So touching on, I guess, so your broader career, because like I say, researching your career, it's a fascinating career to sort of dive into. I mean, you've done so much great work. And so these films, the Family Plan movies, are, I guess, your return to sort of this big screen work. Because for a long time you did a lot of work in television, but then in the early noughties you made your first two films, Some Voices and The One and Only. Yeah. And I guess as someone who's straddled film and television throughout your whole career, and has seemed to sort of be able to dip into both so sort of effectively, like, what is the difference between working in film and then working in television, would you say?
Deep down, there isn't much of a difference, because if you don't have a good script and a good actor and a good crew, you're screwed. Absolutely. And, you know, working on, say, a big-ish show like Boardwalk Empire or Generation Kill, you know, there's a big scale to it. I mean, films tend to have a little bit more money, but as you know, TV now, it's amazing the money they spend on TV series. So I think everyone says that TV can tell a story over a longer period, which is absolutely true. If you take a show like Succession or whatever, there's a real long-running thing. You know, what I love about a movie is that it's a sort of one and done thing. You're in there. It's a busy, tough shoot. You know, 90 or 100 minutes, and you put it out there, and the audience loves it or they don't.
Yeah, and then you just move on to the next one. I guess whereas
Yeah.
TV, it's more of a long-term commitment. And is that kind of liberating then, as someone who has worked in both, like having done some great, like, because in recent years, like I say, you worked on like years and years with Russell T Davies, which is fantastic, and then then started working with Mark. I mean, was it quite liberating then, going from sort of that commitment of television directing to like, okay, now I'm going back to film?
It was, and they give you a little bit of leeway as a director, unless they find out that you're an idiot, and then they give you no leeway at all. So it's a bit scary because you're supposed to, as a director, you're sort of not in charge exactly, but you're more responsible for bringing the film in the right way, financially, but certainly creatively. But that's exciting too. They put a little bit of trust in you, which is scary but very rewarding.
So with so your first two films, as I say, you directed Some Voices and The One and Only back in the early noughties. As someone who is obviously a fan of British films, and you yourself, you've worked in the British film industry before going to America, I guess, with The Family Plan and Apple TV. I mean, I wanted to ask what your opinion was on the British film industry generally in terms of like new filmmakers and like the sort of maybe some of the difficulties that they face, in terms of financing and support, because I feel like there's a rule sometimes. I and this maybe this me, I could be wrong here, but something I've noticed with some sort of new filmmakers is in Britain is that like if you're wanting to make indigenous British films, it can be hard to get a lot of films made because in this country, obviously, there isn't a huge film industry like there is in America. And I guess I just wanted to ask your opinion on that.
Well, we have a medium-sized film industry, I think. We have some great British actors, and also I used a sort of 90% British crew on this film. And my God, they were fantastic. I mean, perhaps we got lucky, but they just like were the cream of the crop. Yeah, I think the film and TV world has sort of changed crazily in the last 10 years. The streaming thing is upended it, mostly in a good way, I think, mostly in an exciting way. Everyone talks about the golden age of TV or whatever, but we're going through one of them, I would say. And there's this new version where you do a sort of biggish budget film, but it ends up on a streamer, which you could say, oh, it'd be great if it was on a bigger screen, but actually it's a sort of totally different form of access. And I found working with Apple to be fantastic. They are filmmakers. I mean, they're not product manufacturers. They were filmmakers. So I've had a really rewarding experience with them.
That's great to hear because I get the sense about Apple that they do really care about the films and the filmmakers. I mean, obviously putting out stuff like Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon.
There you go,
yeah, they really seem to care about. So what were they, in terms of on this film then, were they they were just very happy just to like let you do your thing and then they'll watch and see, how it all...
Yeah, I mean, they're opinionated. They have their opinions, of course. But they were very supportive. And I think they liked the first one, and the first one did okay for them. So they were up for making a second, and we'll see how it does. But I've got my fingers crossed that the audiences will like this one as much as they like the last one. But yeah, no, they definitely keep an eye and let you know what they think. But they're also very pro filmmaker. They very much want to support the people they're working with.
And then as a filmmaker, are you someone who, do you care about sort of, I feel like, because there are some filmmakers who are very outspoken about like, I guess like a Scorsese or a Paul Thomas Anderson who really want or a Christopher Nolan, who want their films to be seen on the biggest screen possible. And then even though they'll work with like Apple TV or Netflix, and that film will go to streaming, they will still be like, there'll be a stipulation going, I want this in a cinema. I mean, is that something that's really is important to you as well? Like you want this on a big screen?
Well, yes, it is. I tell you the tricky thing, which I hope that people watch this film on the best and biggest TV possible. Now, of course, they might choose to watch it on their phone, and it'll be great, and that's fair enough. And that's the audiences are the people who make the choices, not us. We can't tell them what to do. But I think that if you're watching this film with a good sound system on a big, good quality screen, then you are going to get a big effect out of it. So I think you're not being banished to little tiny TVs with the streamers. I think a lot of people who watch them take their movies very seriously and want to watch those movies in the very best way they can.
And I was thinking this as I was watching it because there's some great spectacle in it, like all the stuff in Paris with the parkour. There are some scenes with parkour, and that which would obviously look amazing on a big screen. And the stuff between Kit and Mark, and their face-offs, even like some of their face-offs that are just dialogue, would be like great because they've got such a great there's such a great antagonism, between the two. So I guess on that subject then of sort of TV and film, because as I say, you've done incredible stuff with writers like Russell T Davies on Years and Years, and then David Simon on Generation Kill, and obviously Jessica Jones of Bulwark Empire, all these incredible people that you've worked with. I mean, what kind of lessons do you think you've taken from working with someone like David Simon on Generation Kill or Russell T Davies on Years and Years? I mean, that you've applied to your own work?
Well, people like David Simon and Russell, they're big writers with big ideas. My God, I learned so much working with David Simon. He writes very, very detailed scripts. As you know, he's obsessed with authenticity. And he writes really detailed stage directions, showing lots exactly what a character's thinking and doing and stuff. And I've said to him, how come you just write so much detail in all these stage directions when most people would just leave it to the director to work out? And he says, I'm trying to write a director-proof script.
And what does he mean by that? What a director-proof script?
He doesn't want me to screw it up. He's got a clear idea of what he wants. But, wow, it was a thrill working with him. That guy is serious. He's brilliant. He's very funny. He's really friendly. He's not some power-crazed guy. He's the sort of... He loves being on set. He loves working with directors and actors. He loves it when it feels true.
Well, I think like truth, when you talk to directors, I feel which I've done through this pod, it feels like truth is something that obviously, whether that be emotional through the actors or the script, it feels like that's like the key, the X factor that obviously that you're looking for on set. Would you say that's the case?
Truth is always the thing you're after. Whether you know what kind of truth you want and whether you'll recognize it when you see it, of course, are different matters, because truth is a sort of moving, fluid thing. But yeah, you want some kind of grounding in authenticity. I mean, we're dealing with a guy who's a former assassin, and those people do exist, of course, but there's not millions of them around. So you could say that's quite a heightened storyline. But what we're looking for is a sort of grounded authenticity in the family of it all. So yeah, that's the kind of truth we were after.
And on some of the other projects then, like Generation Kill you mentioned with David Simon, like what was the sort of truth that you were sort of searching for there? It
was a sort of, I think we all, led by David, but all of us wanted to, it was from a book that was a documentary piece of reportage. So we were coming from real material, and it was based on real characters. So the idea there was to get it as real as possible. And David, famously said, I'm really making this TV show for 25 Marines, who are the guys who were featured in the show. And in fact, we showed it at Camp Pendleton near San Diego.
Oh, really?
To a bunch of Marines. And of course they loved it because it was so real.
Well, I remember David Simon saying that when he was researching Generation Kill, like he would be talking to the Marines and the squaddies, and they love all those war movies like Full Metal Jacket and and even stuff like Paths of Glory and Platoon. Obviously, it's kind of baked into almost the DNA of like the whole idea of the American military. And was that what that you found as well when you were sort of, I guess, working with the actors, but also talking to the actual Marines?
Yeah, it's funny. I was working on a pilot of a TV show called The Diplomat, and we were actually filming in the real American Embassy in London. And of course, they have an honor guard, well, more than an honor guard, of real Marines who basically run security, and potentially it's a very big job, that. And we met the Marines, and then they found out that I directed Generation Kill, and my standing just went right up like that.
Your street cred went through the roof.
Street cred, absolutely.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I guess one last thing about David Simon, just because I have to ask, just as a fan, like, I mean, your interactions with him as a director, and he obviously being this writer, and he's director proofing his scripts. Like, was he so he wasn't precious, even though he was doing that. He wasn't precious about like what was he like to work with on the set?
He was lovely. I mean, he would have been precious if I tried to change the script. If I said, "Oh, David, don't worry, we're going to improvise," he'd be going, not so sure about that, thanks. But he wasn't precious, but he was precise. He had a vision which, he fortunately, I just shared it. I loved what he'd done, and that's exactly the film that I wanted to make. If I hadn't liked it, then either I wouldn't have done it, or I'd have done it and we would not have got on, and it would have been a nightmare. But I just loved what he wanted to do and wanted to do the same thing. So we got on great.
It was a great match of people.
Yeah.
Amazing. And that improvisational sort of nature that you sort of talk about just there, I mean, like, because obviously on the family plans 1 and 2, it sounded like there was quite a lot of improvisation between the actors. Is that something that you like to foster? Because I feel like some directors are quite sort of, some of them love to sort of improvise and sort of open it up to the actors, but then I think some are very rigid, like, this is the script, let's do it.
I think it's very much, it's very story or script or the writer you're working with dependent or whatever, or the actors you're working with. I think it's a great thing to be able to do because, even if you're sticking very religiously to the script, it's quite nice to sort of break the wall a tiny bit in a later take. It just keeps things fresh.
And some of the scenes in like Family Plan 2, like where there's a scene in a Chinese restaurant, that felt kind of like it had that sort of spontaneous energy. Was that one of those scenes where he was like, okay, let's open this up to, Mark and Michelle, and then we'll just use what comes through? I mean, when you're improvising a scene like that, I guess, or adding an improvisational element, do you just like have the camera rolling, like rolling take, let's just keep it rolling and see what comes up?
That's one of the reasons why I like using 3 cameras, which is, some people would say, is a sort of expensive luxury, but actually it just helps you work faster. If you use each of those cameras properly, then, like you say, the actors don't have to do so many takes because you're covering 3 or 4 of them in one go. And then so you just do a few takes and then suddenly you go, okay, we got the scene. So you can get stuff done more quickly. And actors love not having to repeat themselves every time, because the fewer times they do it, if they're on form, they go, okay, look, I've done this 4 times really well. Why are we doing it another 16 times?
For sure.
Some David Fincher famously will do 50 or more takes, and that takes you into a completely different world, and I respect that as well. But there are so many ways to skin these cats.
It's like, you've got, on one hand, you've got Fincher doing upwards of 50 takes. On the other hand, you've got William Friedkin, who did like 2 takes, or like 1 take, because all he was after was spontaneity, as you say. I guess as a director then, where did you sort of hone and learn and then hone that sort of craft of like, okay, let's do 3 cameras. I know exactly how many we need for this scene. Let's put 1 there, 3, 1 there, and let's shoot it like that. Where do you think that came from?
I learned in low budget TV. I worked quite a lot when I was young at the BBC, which I love. It's probably not as good to work at now, but because it's all sort of splintered up. But it was like, they probably spent too much money on certain things, but it was a real hothouse of talent and creation. And yeah, I worked on shows in the BBC. I worked on a sort of cop procedural show called The Bill years and years ago, which was like, you shoot it really fast and you get in real trouble if you overrun. And you learn the hard way that you've got to, it's like those people doing B movies and having no budgets and having to work out how to achieve the day's work and make it look cool. So I would say that's, whatever my talents, they are helped by working in that TV world all those years ago.
Where you have to work fast and you have to get it in 1 day or 2 days, and if you don't, then that's that. So you have to deliver.
Exactly.
I feel like Russell T Davies, who you, as we say, you worked on with years and years. I want to say he has a fairly similar background, because I want to say he started in sort of children's television and the BBC in the 80s and 90s. And I think maybe he could say the same thing, that, he really learned his craft in that same sort of hothouse environment. I mean, speaking of Russell, what was it like working with him specifically on, like, we were talking about truth. I mean, and what you're trying to find truth, with Simon and then with Mark on this film. Like, what was it like with Russell on that?
Well, it really helps that he's a lovely man. I really like it when they're nice and fun. But I would be careful about using the word visionary, but I think it might just be appropriate with him. I think he thinks really, really big. He's got a real individual style to his writing. I think, funnily enough, I don't think that would be. I'm not sure he'd have loved it, but you read his stuff and you go, well, we don't really need to improvise this. There's such a lovely through line. Let's trust the script and let's go with it. And And he and I we'd go and have secret dinners quite often. We'd just go and not get drunk at all, but have a glass of wine and go have a lovely Italian meal and just gossip and chat. And he's such lovely, fun company that he really makes you sort of think it's worthwhile.
That's amazing because he does seem like such a genuine sort of lovely chap, and obviously a brilliant writer and creator. I mean, when you talk about like David Simon director proofing his scripts, I'm guessing is Russell like the opposite? Is Russell similar, or is he complete opposite? Like, no, this is this is for you. Let's
he gives you.
Look at it.
Russell gives you a lot of leeway, but there's certain things that he's really keen to get. And again, I think any good director is going to have a good relationship with the writer. And I think I spent a lot of time with Russell talking about what he wanted, sometimes saying what I wanted, and just getting things clear. So, I would arrive on set and I go, well, I remember Russell was really keen that this scene didn't get too dark or serious, or, whatever it was. So that's the collaboration thing that I really love.
And then, because what you said there about how, like, with the script, like, Russell's voice sort of shines through, like, every line. I feel like when you watch his stuff, the stuff that he's written, his voice shines through every line. It reminds me of what you just said there, reminds me of some actors saying, like, you don't want to change anything in the script because, like, it's there. It's like, it's right there on the page. All we have to do is bring it to life. I mean, is that kind of how you feel about doing something like Years and Years?
I think that's the sort of way we worked it out. I mean, it's because he does have a sort of, his writing style is very good because it's quite heightened, but it's very, very real and grounded. And again, that was interesting. That was Years and Years was essentially a show about a family, a complicated, messy, very loving, and occasionally disastrous family. Over the years, I know there was a lot of looking into the future and stuff, and I don't think he was really looking into being a fortune teller. I think he was just looking to see how, even if the world changed, humanity and their relationships and their families would kind of carry on doing the same stupid things and the same loving things.
Yeah, well, it's something I find something kind of almost comforting in that idea that, like, human beings, and that's comforting and also frightening, but I guess the comforting side of that idea is that human beings have always and always will be human beings and making the same mistakes, but also performing the same sort of, I guess, as corny as it sounds, same acts of kindness and sort of, empathy towards each other. So that's something that I really appreciated in that show. And it's funny you mentioned the fortune teller element. I mean, even just rewatching the first episode, like, the amount of stuff you guys got right in that sort of that initial montage where you sort of cover those first 5 years. Queen Elizabeth passes, you cover the Ukrainian-Russian war, you cover President Trump getting back into power. Like, so I was watching this, like, rewatching it, and just kind of my jaw was on the floor with how much you guys nailed since, because obviously that show came out in 2019, and then it's, it goes up to 20. It was pretty amazing.
That's it. I remember Russell. So me and Russell talking about the Donald Trump, and Russell saying he's gonna be back as president, and then he lost the election to Biden, and so people went, "Oh, Russell was wrong there." And now look what happened. So Russell wasn't that wrong, was he?
No, he wasn't. He must have some kind of crystal ball that he's got tucked away somewhere in, So going back to the family plan, I was curious because, as I say, it's this great mix of tones: comedy, action, family, drama and comedy. What were some of the influences that you felt sort of, in you when you were making the movie? And I guess what were some of the influences that you and Mark as well talked about, as he was producing the film?
Well, everyone loves sort of Home Alone for some reason. I don't know why, but it's such a brilliant film. It's interesting because I remember watching a fantastic film called A History of Violence, which is a David Cronenberg movie, which has a kind of a similar plot to the first film, but is unimaginably dark, whereas our film was not. And I really sort of liked the idea of making a film that had some kind of, on one level, a homage to a thing, but without belittle. I think History of Violence is a fantastic film, but obviously we didn't want that for this because it would have been a repetition and it would have been miserable. But I think that it was really interesting thinking of that approach about trying to sort of make, because the first film was about, you could say it's a comedy about a father trying to kill his own son, which obviously is not very funny, is it? But it
But
was.
when you put it like that, it's quite funny.
But yeah, exactly. So I think it's about, getting the elements from gangster movies and chase movies and crime movies and things like that, and just trying to weave them together in a way that the film, even though it's got things you recognise, becomes its own thing.
Yeah, it's funny because now you've said history of violence, I can totally see the through line from Cronenberg through to what you guys have done. I mean, that premise could so easily tip over into horror, like of the family plan, but like
Sure.
the tonal sort of tightrope of making it funny and and emotional, with the family. You spoke, you care about the family, you especially the kids with the dad, yeah. So like I say, it's a tightrope that you guys were walking, I guess, tonally with it. Were there any other sort of films that would Mark sort of bring you when you say he was sort of full of ideas? Was he bringing sort of like, oh, what about this? What about this? With terms of like we could talk, talking about this film or referencing this or that kind of thing.
No, he was. I mean, he was really excited. In the first film, for example, he had to speak quite a lot of French, and in the second film, he had to speak Chinese. And the amount of work he did on that was unbelievable. It was sort of rather glorious to see that a big movie star will put in that kind of effort. It sort of reassures you that not all is screwed with the film industry if there are people like that still around. But yeah, I mean, I sort of, I always have a little soft spot for those sort of edgy 70s action movies, your action crime movies. The French Connection is never too far from my heart. I still think that's one of the great car chases, the French Connection.
Oh, incredible.
So, yeah, I mean, I remember watching, it's that dangerous thing of I watched all the good car chases, basically, because we had a car chase in the last one and in this one. And you go, well, look, I'm probably not going to be quite as good as William Friedkin or whatever, but I want to try and do something pretty cool here. What is I forget what the thing is. Amateur experts borrow, but geniuses steal. I don't know what the phrase is.
It's Picasso, isn't it? It's like, great artists steal, but like mediocre artists borrow, something like that.
That's right. Yeah. That's what
Speaking of French Connection, have you seen French Connection 2?
Of course. My God.
Yeah.
Well,
quite underrated, I'd say. I mean, French Connection 1's obviously, a stone cold classic, but I think French Connection 2 has got, it's pretty good,
Right, a very dark ending, isn't it?
Very dark. I mean, the whole
Very
film.
dark ending. It's basically a police execution, isn't it, at the end?
Yeah, essentially, and all the stuff with Gene Hackman, basically, trying to get himself off heroin, forcible,
exactly.
So it's really they didn't pull any punches really with that one. John Frankenheimer directed that one. So the guy who did Ronin and Seconds, another great car chase, obviously Ronin from the 90s. You talk about like sort of great 70s. Like, what are some of your other favorite films from that era that other than French Connection?
One of my absolute favorite films is The Graduate. Which is like, I think it was only his second movie, although of course he'd done lots of theatre, Mike Nichols. And Midnight Cowboy, I think is a stone cold classic. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I think, I can quote just reams of all that. I think it was Jaws, I think it was was an extraordinary sort of 8 or 9 year period of movies. I think it's coincided with the zoom lens being invented. I think that was the early 70s. Which suddenly everyone went, oh my God, the camera goes like that. How incredible. Let's just do it ad infinitum.
Yeah, and everyone was using it. Everyone from the top of Kubrick to I guess people making, the B movies and the exploitation movies of the time. It was like everyone just got their hands on that tech and were like, let's use it.
Exactly.
In that age of the 70s then, that was when I guess you were growing up and those films were really sort of getting infused into your bloodstream. Is that fair to say? That was when you really discovered?
Well, I mean, that's when I sort of started, and then I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, I sort of went back and revisited the 70s, with perhaps a little more wisdom and knowledge, not much, but a little more. And I found that they really stand up so well, those movies. They last, even though they're totally outdated.
Well, I dated, I guess, in some ways, but like you can't fault like if you go watch, Jaws. I mean, like that's just timeless.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the amazing thing about that time for me is like when I read about it and when I watch those movies is the idea, and the thing that a lot of those filmmakers who were making those films at the time were saying, like, the studios were so pro filmmaker. They were all the studio heads were like filmmakers themselves. They had made films and they had worked in film, and they really loved, like, they would be screening like Bergman films in between on their lunch breaks and stuff, and like in between meetings, and I feel like you get that real sense of like, again, like that hothouse you talked about, the BBC. It's like there's a hothouse environment of like, let's just make great work. That's what's so great about companies like Apple and also like A24, who really support the filmmakers. I guess that goes through, doesn't it? Being a British filmmaker, I was curious to ask, with sort of they're talking about that sort of industry with like the British film industry, but also like Hollywood. Do you feel like a lot of filmmakers? I feel like something that a lot of British filmmakers do. Going back to what we were talking about how it can be sometimes quite hard for a British filmmaker to get off the ground in terms of like to build a career and a filmography. Sometimes, what's your opinion on like the idea of British filmmakers being sort of having to go overseas to like Hollywood, like, people like Hitchcock and sort of Boyle and Nolan and all those guys. Yeah. And I guess, and yourself too, like, I guess, like, like making, like, cause you made 2 films in Britain and then these films, and now I guess you return to the big screen, but you're making them with Apple and Mark and British crews as well. But like, I guess what's your opinion on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, America's the daddy or the mummy of that world, really. I think because it's just a big country and a big company. That's where all the studios are based. I think as a filmmaker, you go where you can get stuff made for certain. But as a filmmaker, what you have to do, you have to make movies, and like you say, if you're youngish and unproven, it's really hard to get that first gig. But there's a lot of TV that gets made. And there's a few improvements happening. I think finally more women are getting directing work. I mean, I'm sure there's not a single woman in the world who would say, "Hey guys, thanks, everything's fixed." But I do think there's a responsibility in the film business to hire more imaginatively rather than old middle class white people like me. I'm very honoured to still be working. But I do think the industry needs to find the new talents.
And in terms of like the new talents, I mean, like, and this, I guess this is like, not only like crew, but also like stars and filmmakers. I mean, who at the moment is kind of, I guess, like firing you up at the moment that you're getting really excited about, either to work with or maybe like you're a fan of their work? Like, what's getting you excited about in sort of the film world these days?
I do love Josh O'Connor. I think also there's a director I think is really cool called Nia DaCosta.
Yes.
I think that's her name. That's her name. She's really good.
Yeah.
And young and properly talented. So I think there's a few people around, and it's hard to get noticed. You need a bit of luck. We don't want it to be all children of middle class people. And there's nothing wrong with a few nepo babies, but let's make sure there's a diversity of nepo here, because I do think we want to see films made by different people. And, everyone goes, oh, there's so many, everything's a franchise now. But I think, you've got films like companies like A24, and you've got big movies. I just saw One Battle After Another, which is fantastic. It's very long. I loved it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. That's a big filmmaker and it's a big film and, big actors, and it probably costs quite a lot of money. But that's a film that isn't sort of just straightforwardly commercial. It's got a boldness to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that film as well. And it's funny you mentioned we talk about car chases. Like that film's almost got like an anti-car chase in it.
Yes. Oh my god, it's really cool, that thing at the end, isn't it? I absolutely, the thing going up and down, and I think it's really good. I mean, he's well, we talked about him before, but he's a proper filmmaker. And, I watched, not long ago, I watched Boogie Nights again. Oh. Mark Wahlberg is utterly brilliant in it, but so is everyone else. But Mark, he has this scene towards the end where he has to come back and to Burt Reynolds, and he sort of bursts into tears, and I go, oh my God, and it all seems to be in one take. But yeah, Paul Thomas Anderson, you know, I think he's a good one.
He is a very good one, isn't he? And you mentioned, of course, Boogie Nights and Mark. I mean, because I think there was a time, obviously, like Boogie Nights is one of my favourite performances of Mark's. I think he's so good in that film. And like I said, I'm a fan of his generally, but I think particularly in that film, he's just incredible. And I want to say, maybe I'm wrong, but I want to say maybe there was a time when he was a bit ambivalent about how he felt about the film. I think nowadays he's very positive about it, and he says, "This was a great film for me. It's a great project. I loved working with Paul." Maybe at the time, maybe there was a time when he was a little bit more ambivalent. But I guess, did you ever talk to Mark about Boogie Nights? Did you ever sort of say, "Oh, you know"?
I definitely have. I think he's quite proud of it. You know, it's one of the, you know, he's made a couple of really classic films, you know, Three Kings, I remember, The Departed and things like that. But yeah, so I think he's really proud of Boogie Nights. I mean, it was quite, you know, it's quite out there, you know, you're playing a sex performer and quite exposing, in literally, of course, but in other ways too. But I think you know, tonally, it just landed so brilliantly.
It's the fact that it can, again, it's like, you could even say it's another film about family, and it condenses 8 years into, you know, 2 hours 20. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you know, it's a comedy about drug addiction, the porn industry, and suicide, you could say. So,
Yeah. I guess to finish on a family plan 2 question. I mean, do you have a favourite memory of that shoot? I mean, do you have a favourite day that you think back on, and you look back on and go, "Oh, that was a great day with like Mark and the others"?
yeah, I've got quite a few actually, but what I'd probably single out is we did a car chase in a Montmartre, famous part of Paris, around this spectacular church. I'd had the idea to try and shoot it up there because I saw these steps that sort of near where John Wick was filmed and all of that. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to get a car to go down these steps being chased by another one? And I thought, there's no way are we going to get permission. It's too expensive. They'll never close the street, whatever. But that sequence, it happened almost exactly as we storyboarded it. And that was probably my most fun part of the shoot.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what I enjoy most is the actors and doing the acting scenes. But realizing a big car chase that kind of was quite bold, that was a little ambition of mine.
Yeah. So how much of that was practical out of interest? Because it is quite an impressive. Like, you know, you're going down those steps at Montmartre, and it's like it's really, you know, it's quite a tactile scene. Like, you know, how much of that, I guess, was the tactile sort of filmmaking?
Well, a lot of the scenes with them in the car are scenes with them in the car, for sure. But yeah, for definitely some bits, you know, you can't do crashes because people get hurt. So we had the same car on a gimbal in a studio, you know, doing all the sharp turns and the dialogue and stuff like that. And then we went back and we knew that we had the sort of dialogue of the scene. We went back and then we shot a lot of the dialogue again because it was sort of more fun in situ. Yeah, a lot of it was done for real.
And I'm guessing, and the city of Paris was absolutely fine. They didn't give you any problems or any issues with doing that. They were like, "Oh, go for it."
No, they were. In the end, they were. Yes, go for it. But you know, you have to, because there's so many boxes to tick and so many things to do. That, you know, we had to be formal in our approach and be professional and stuff. But yeah, it's a wonderful city to shoot in.
Did they have like police or anything like stationed around, like just keeping an eye? Was it like, you know, just in case? Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, we had to, you know, safety's always, fortunately these days, safety's a big thing. And yeah, the police were around, and they kept us safe. But I like the French. It's just, you know, it's a bit of a generalization, but I do.
Fantastic, Simon. Well, this has been such a great chat. It was such a pleasure to talk to you and have you on the pod. Yeah, I'm very excited for when the film opens theatrically on the 21st. It was like I say, it was a privilege to see the film before it's gone out. And I guess what can we expect from you next? Like, what have you got any projects coming up next?
That's a great question. I need to sort of sleep for 6 months. You know, I'm exhausted. I've done 3 films on the bounce. But I don't know. I mean, obviously, I love Mark. I'll definitely work with Mark again. But what else would I do? You know, I'd love to do a sort of very slightly 70s political heist movie thriller, something like that.
Okay, so staying on the big screen then, or do you think you'd sort of move back into television?
Wherever. I mean, you know, you get a few more tools to play with on the big screen, but you know, sometimes I go, wow, I'm lucky to be working on things that I love.
Fantastic. And are you going to earmark Josh O'Connor for a central role in
Definitely,
that?
I'll definitely work with him anytime. Yeah, for sure.
Brilliant. That'll be amazing. Well, thank you so much, Simon. As I say, this was such a pleasure, and thanks again for your time. And yeah, this was an absolute blast. Thanks again.
Great, really nice to see you.
Nice
Thank you so much.